Hi, everyone, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm your host, Anthony Pastori. There is a lot of talk out there right now surrounding climate policies, all of which could impact the way forward for green tech initiatives. We're going to discuss some of these right now with my guest for today, Michelle O'Liberty, thematic investing associate with the Chief Investment Office. Michelle, great to see you, and thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk to you about a couple of different things today. First and foremost, though, recently in the last couple of weeks, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a vote of 6-3, has restricted the EPA's authority to mandate carbon reduction emissions, or emission reductions, I should say. And this certainly comes at a time when everybody's really focusing on the way forward for climate and green tech, as you and your team are always writing about within the Chief Investment Office. So what does this actually mean when it comes to the way forward, especially as these kind of impediments have now been put on the EPA by the Supreme Court?
Yeah, it's a great question because there are a lot of different policy initiatives out there right now that do have an impact on the green tech space. And the Supreme Court EPA ruling certainly did get a lot of headlines over the last couple of weeks. It does, at a high level, limit the reach of the EPA, but it's a little bit more complex than what the headlines might suggest. And what the court concluded was that Congress did not explicitly grant statutory authority to the EPA to pursue a broad policy such as regulating greenhouse gas emissions at the national level. So really this implies that federal agencies' ability to interpret the laws that are written by Congress could be waning. But the reason I say it's a little bit more complex than the headlines might suggest are because there are some other important things to remember in terms of other avenues that can be explored. And I think one important point here is that the ruling does not limit the EPA's ability to regulate individual power plants or power plants that come on in the future under Section 111B of the Clean Air Act. So the other important thing here is that the power of the purse lies with Congress. So this has always been true, and this Supreme Court ruling does not change that. So what I mean by the power of the purse is that there are still spending avenues that Congress can pursue that do not have to do with the EPA ruling. So whether it be investment tax credits, production tax credits, infrastructure spending, those are all still very much fair game. Whether or not Congress chooses to act on any of those things, that's something that remains to be seen, but certainly still well within their capability to do so. So ultimately, we do think that this could shift attention, again, back to state initiatives, which is something that we've seen in the past under other administrations.
Right, yeah, and essentially what the Supreme Court basically was saying is that anytime an agency does something big and new, that the regulation is presumptively invalid, and then it goes to Congress to specifically authorize regulating in the space. But of course, with so much divisiveness in Congress these days, I think the Supreme Court was making a stand to say, well, we think we're just going to leave it there and let the Congress decide. So I think it's a really interesting move, and as you said, there are some purse strings that can be opened in the future for some of these plans that come their way. Thanks, Michelle. I want to talk about the Build Back Better plan with you. This is that $1.7 trillion plan that was proposed by the Biden administration. And essentially what the plan, what's happened is that Senator Joe Manchin essentially killed it by saying he remains concerned about the impact that new climate initiatives and spending could have on inflation. Probably not a big surprise that Manchin wouldn't agree to this, because he's been sort of talking about this for the last couple of months. But what is the impact then on this decision by Manchin on energy transition in general?
Sure, and thanks, Anthony. It's a good question. Reports, did surface. I think it was last Thursday that basically, to your point, said that Senator Manchin, who of course has a very key vote in the Senate, had essentially shut down any hope for any climate-related spending. Interestingly, though, what got a little bit less coverage was that next morning, Senator Manchin actually went on a statewide radio show, and he pushed back on this narrative a bit, that negotiations were not off the table, but his concerns were, again, to your point, very much related to inflation. And he is indicating now that he wants some more time to assess this inflationary backdrop, and specifically, he wants to see the August 10th CPI number. But before I get too much into the weeds on that, I think it's important to go back to your point that this push and pull on Build Back Better is not new. Put frankly, there are a lot of people in Congress that just simply don't agree on what should or shouldn't be in that plan on both sides of the aisle. So while we wouldn't say that the odds are zero here that something gets done, it is a big lift, and I'm not going to hold my breath for August 10th. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on what we do know at this time. And what we do know is that we have a bipartisan infrastructure bill already, and this did allocate funding not only for traditional infrastructure, but also some climate-related aspects as well. For example, there's some funding for water initiatives, including PFAS. The Department of Energy was allocated about $60 billion for clean energy initiatives, including renewables and nuclear, to be spent over several years. The Department of Energy also just guaranteed a loan for a clean energy and storage project. So again, a lot of moving parts outside of just Build Back Better. President Biden is expected to speak in Massachusetts today. We could get some incremental news there. I think that's happening pretty much as we speak, so we'll see what comes out of that. But ultimately, to the point of your question, the energy transition is going to be dictated by economics, and it's about cost and reliability that are ultimately going to dictate the speed of this energy transition. And policy can certainly help to accelerate things, but again, I think it really comes down to economics, cost, and reliability as the key for this transition.
Right, and as we know with the Build Back Better plan, Democrats had been hoping to put together a slimmed down version of the nearly $2 trillion bill. So we'll see what comes out of that. As you said, President Biden is speaking in Massachusetts. Senator Manchin hasn't really completely said 100% no. Not surprising. It'll probably go back and forth a little bit. Maybe another slimmed down version. We will see. But again, a continuing discussion, especially when it relates to green tech and the green tech initiatives that you're discussing. I want to ask you about one more, and this one might be a little bit more complicated. It might be certainly for our viewers as well, because as you and I both said, these two topics that I'm about to ask you about can be really convoluted and a little bit complicated. But there's the net metering debate that's happening in California. There's the tariff circumvention case. Both of these related to solar and solar panels, the purchasing of solar panels. Maybe you can explain what those are and even just a little bit about how it fits into the green tech theme.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great point because both of these things have definitely been weighing on companies in the renewable energy space so far this year. And just starting with the solar tariff circumvention case. So earlier this year, the Department of Commerce was investigating whether or not companies were circumventing solar tariffs in their supply chains. And basically, this was adding another supply side challenge, to a world that is already very much plagued by supply side challenges. So this is causing companies to have to delay or to push out some of their products to 2023 or even 2024. But what's happened more recently is that President Biden did evoke executive action to delay the potential tariffs for 2 years because, again, companies were delaying and pushing out those projects because of the uncertainty that is associated with these tariffs. They were potentially being applied retroactively, so companies didn't know, what possible tariff they may be facing if they were to pursue a project, and that was causing, again, some delays. They were also proposed to be as high as 250%. Ultimately, we don't see an end tariff regardless of whether it's found that there's circumvention occurring or not. We would view an end result of tariffs to be 250% as unlikely. But this executive action does delay this for, again, about 2 years. It's likely to be fought in court, though, given that it's an executive action. So I think that this is still causing some investors to just pause, see what's happening here, how is this going to play out. And we're still getting new details on that really every day. So moving on there to net metering in California, there was a proposal that came out last December that revised California's net energy metering policy. And that proposal detailed a greater than expected reduction in the benefit paid back to rooftop solar customers for pushing out solar energy onto the grid. So this was just a proposal, as I mentioned, but again, given that it was a bit of a larger reduction than expected, there has been some pushback, and California has recently signaled that this review process is going to take some time, and we have really yet to see a final decision. So this is something that we're all watching and looking for, but it has not happened yet. So remains to be seen at this time.
Right. Essentially, the amount of money that a Californian who has solar panels gets paid for putting the energy back into the grid is going to be less, or that's the proposal, that it would be less than it is today, so maybe less incentive for them to put the solar panels on their homes, et cetera. So yeah, that would be a big deal. And even, I think, before President Biden announced that he would be putting that 2-year moratorium back on the anti-circumvention investigation into solars, there was even statutory rules saying they could go back as far as November of 2021 and backdate anyone with those extra 250% costs and tariffs for companies that bought some of the solar panels from those countries that were mentioned. So that would have been a really big deal as well. Anyway, it's always an ongoing conversation. And I know in this world, whether it's green tech or any of the other themes that you are focusing on and doing research and writing about, things change on a daily basis. So we appreciate you coming in and talking about what's happening right now with climate and all the things that are going on in the space. Thanks, Michelle.
Of course, happy to be here.
Great.
Thanks,
And I know
Anthony.
we're going to get you on more because there is a lot happening in your world. So we'll see you soon.
Absolutely.
And thank you all for joining us today. And we appreciate you sticking around. And for more information and access to a lot of the content that comes out of UBS, you can visit ubs.com/views. You can also check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the like. You can also look at past UBS Trending episodes just like this one on demand on our website, ubs.com/studios, and on the UBS YouTube channel. And if you have any questions about how any of this conversation and the topics we discussed today with Michelle could impact your portfolio, make sure to speak with a financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day, everybody, and remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. We'll see you soon.